Texas is like a supercharged capitalist state with all the dialogue and all the rhetoric from politicians and so forth. The bottom line is they have deployed a giant amount of batteries in the last 2 years.
We're all in a hurry, and we need as an industry take that cassette out and put the faster cassette in that's going to drive at a much higher speed. But that's the way we need to work.
Those same companies that are going to space, they need electricity and they need it now.
That's right.
Right? And so if the utility sector doesn't provide it, they'll figure out a way to provide it for themselves.
How do we want to make the grid so much efficient that nobody will think, I better disconnect because I can do it by myself? Because the grid is the best way of providing electricity efficiently, economically, and reliably.
Hello and welcome to The Energy Gang, a discussion show from Wood Mackenzie about the fast-changing world of energy. I'm Ed Crooks, and on this show we're going to be talking about what is probably the hottest sector in the global energy industry right now, which is battery storage. To talk about that, it's a pleasure as always to welcome back Amy Myers-Jaffe. Amy is the director of the Energy, Climate Justice and Sustainability Lab at New York University. Hi Amy, how are you?
I'm great, Ed, and I survived minus 10 degrees or whatever it was at night here in the New York metro area. And I just saying I'm excited to have a show on batteries today because miraculously, my electric car was buried under 1.5 feet of snow for 3 days. And after I dug it out, it started and the battery was still fully charged. Miracle.
Fantastic. That is very impressive. And as you say, it's exactly these issues we want to get into with our guest on the show today, who is Julian Nebreda, who is the president and chief executive of the battery storage company Fluence. Hello, Julian. Welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for the invite and looking forward to discuss.
Likewise, very much looking forward to the conversation. So look, I want to come on to Fluence in a moment, talk about what the company does and what its role is in the electricity system. Before we do that, though, Julian, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about yourself, your personal story. As you probably know, the first time we have anyone new on the show, we always like to ask them a bit about their careers in energy, how they got started. So what's your story? What first made you decide to pursue a career in energy?
I wanted to be a public servant. I wanted to, go into, public service, politics, kind of that world. And as I started looking at electricity, and it was the closest thing to public service in the private sector. And that's how I got here. I really, really saw it. I really liked, in my career, the opportunity, how directly connected is what we do in the power sector in general, with the welfare of human beings and how they live and how they, So that's how it started. That's why I decided to go into this industry, and that's what keeps me here today. So
right. So I've been talking about Fluence as a battery storage company. Do you want to explain exactly what it is that you do?
So we design, manufacture, and deliver and maintain battery solutions, or solutions for the power sector using battery technology. So we go from the design of the solution, manufacture the product mostly to contract manufacturing. We are not not a manufacturing company. And when we deliver the product, maintain the product through its life and help and recycle when the end of life of the product. That's our solution. So we define ourselves as a solutions company using battery technology as the core of our technology solution. That's the way you should think of it.
And your customer base then is utilities and developers and anyone who needs power?
We as a company we work mostly in front of the meter, but now we're doing some behind the meter, but utility scale. So we sell to utilities, we sell to IPPs, to independent power producers, we sell to developers of power projects. And we also sell to C&I, including now data centers, which is kind of the new hot topic, which are big consumers of electricity, where we can provide utility scale. We don't do residential or small C&I. This is, our core, our value propositions is with utility scale, in front of the meter generally.
Yeah, and certainly want to come on to data centers in a bit because I think it's worth digging into a bit what's going on there. But just in general terms, I know you've just recently in the last few days reported quarterly earnings for the first quarter of your company's financial year, the fourth quarter of 2025. How are things going? How's business?
Well, tremendous demand. We have seen, especially in the U.S., after 2025, where we had kind of a calm U.S. market, to use a soft word. Now we're seeing the U.S. picking up again, driven some of it AI, but also C&I, utilities are also looking. So tremendous investment in the sector. I think that was the defining point of our earnings call.
And do you think in the U.S. market, is it extreme weather? Is it the realization that you can't really add generation capacity quickly, and so therefore you need these other solutions? I know in ERCOT, where people believe that, it's the home of natural gas, actually batteries have been the solution of choice for the last 2 years.
So a few things in the U.S. market. First, the U.S. market was a little bit, went through some disruptions last year with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which created, normal regulatory uncertainty, and the Liberation Day tariff announcements, which also created some trade uncertainty. But so that kind of put brakes on the U.S. market for doing parts of last year, but that now is picking up. And what we see today in the U.S. market is a tremendous need for capacity. As you were saying, some of it being by the demand for, data centers, but not only data centers, the economy is growing. There's a big effort to bring in new manufacturing capacity to the U.S., So those drivers, stronger economy, data centers, and new, industrial processes that are coming to us is putting a lot of strain, a lot of strain in the power sectors. And today, the fastest and most economically efficient way to deliver capacity is battery storage. As you were saying, even in places where gas can be abundant, there's no way of resolving your capacity needs with natural gas. Storage is the best way to resolve the capacity needs. We can deliver products. Our products can be from idea to, actual operations very, very quickly, in 18 to 24 months. That compare that to any thermal project or any renewable project, it will take up much, much longer. So that's what's driving it. It's a sense of urgency that we have today, and the ability of our technology with, the cost outs and the improvements in technology that put us in a very, very good competitive position.
So Amy mentioned extreme weather, and very much on everyone's minds, the brutally cold conditions we've had here in North America over the past couple of weeks. I see from looking at my phone now, I think the weather's showing me that it's still minus 11 Celsius outside. Was that about 11 Fahrenheit? And it's actually warmer than it was yesterday. I think perhaps the worst of it has really passed. So it has been a really challenging period, very heavy snowfall as well. And in this difficult period of extreme weather, on the whole, the US power grid does seem to have held up pretty well. If you compare it to Winter Storm Uri in 2021, almost exactly 5 years ago, that killed many hundreds of people, most of them in Texas. But compared to that, there have been this time fewer deaths and fewer power outages. And when you look at the reasons, clearly there's been an improved performance from thermal power generation, definitely. One of the big issues, in fact, the single biggest issue in Winter Storm Uri was the collapse of gas-fired generation and, to an extent, coal-fired generation in Texas. Those sectors have performed much better this time round. So that's an important part of the story. But we all are also now seeing this contribution from battery storage. The numbers I was looking at, there was a peak of batteries discharging to the grid at about 6 gigawatts in total across the US, and that was about 1% then of total power supply across the country. So you could say, well, that's not that much, only 1%. But on the other hand, if that 1% wasn't there, you'd definitely notice it. So And Julian, I'm interested in your thoughts about this. When you think about grid resilience during this kind of extreme weather event, how important is battery storage now, do you think?
So I think the role that battery storage plays in any sort of strain situation for the grid. Let's say in this case we're talking about natural weather issues, but in any strain situation, is the ability that battery storage have to respond quickly, no, and to ensure that new source of generation can be integrated into the market in an organized manner. Because what happens in the electricity sector, we saw this year in Spain, when one power generation goes down because a gas line has a problem or a pump doesn't work somewhere. If the market does not react immediately, you go into kind of a domino effect. One falls, the other falls, and then it goes away. The physics of electricity run the system. What has been the big difference, I think, from today and besides ensuring that pipelines are ready for weather, all of that stuff, is that we had some issues with some gas plants, but battery storage was able, in the case of Texas, to react very, very quickly to ensure that the market did not see a disruption and that allow a new pipeline, a new gas plant somewhere else within or interconnection capability to ring and resolve the issue. And I think that tool has been extremely, extremely, extremely useful and has been tremendously valuable to ensure that the unreliability coming out of weather, as the case of Texas or any other situation, does not convert into a crisis. No, so as you said, 1% doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot when you want to ensure that any problems you may have does not convert into a disaster. No, it's just a problem.
Well, and some of that 1% is concentrated in key markets. So, has a much bigger impact. I was recently on a panel with a very smart person from New York ISO, and they were explaining this thing about, we think about batteries as being really good about solving the duck curve. We have this once a day peak demand in the summer from 4 to 8 p.m. And, you can utilize the batteries and some of it can be automated. But he made the point that with winterizing, you have two big demand periods, one first thing in the morning, crack of dawn, and then the second one actually after peak, so like 8 p.m., when it gets very cold and some people using electric heaters and so forth. He made it sound like batteries can't handle a 2-a-day peak, and then I thought to myself, is that really true? And I just get your input, because you're working on these projects.
We sell systems that are designed to deliver two discharges and 2 charges a day, 2 cycles a day. Especially in Europe. In New York, I don't think we have that I remember. But in Europe, most of the European cities have 2 peaks, one bigger than the other one clearly, but they want battery systems that can actually serve both peaks. And we design systems for that without any problems. There are no issues at all, no technical issues of any sort. We can charge them quickly and have them ready. Usually the 2 peaks have a difference of time of 6-8 hours among them, so it's more than enough time to charge the batteries and get them ready for the second peak.
And so is my experience. I in the past, when I didn't have a home charger, there were days where I couldn't actually get the fast charger to charge my car in the winter. But now that I have a home charger, it's been pretty reliable, I have to say, shockingly so. What about cold? People say when you have a car, typically your battery, you have the heat on in the car, your battery drains a lot faster in the winter. What if it's a stationary solution?
Yeah, we have solutions that work in Finland, I would say closer to the North Pole that you can ever get. 99% availability, no issues. We had during the recent winter storm in Texas for systems that were not especially designed for cold weather, but they can manage cold weather clearly. 96, 97% availability, very, very high availability. So no main issues on our ability to respond to weather conditions, that minus 5 degrees, 10 degrees in the case of Finland, and we go without any problems at all during the year. So historically, that was their argument. During cold weather, batteries don't work. It's a matter of, it's like, but gas pipelines. If you do not have them ready to work during cold weather, they won't work. But, it's not that difficult to ensure that pipelines are weatherized or ready for cold weather work if they need to. The same with batteries.
That's very interesting. And just going back to Amy's point about 2 cycles a day, something I'm realizing I don't know the answer to is how long does it take to charge typically a stationary storage battery installation? To get 1 hour of discharge, how long would you have to charge for?
You can charge it, depends on what you want, how you want to do it, So generally, but they say you can physically charge it at the same speed you discharge it. No, that's the way you should think about it. If it takes a 4-hour system, it will take 4 hours to charge. Not like your iPhone that takes a long time to charge. You charge it very quickly.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. So, look, I think one of the things as I'm hearing you explain this, I think is really important in terms of the broader debate about the energy transition, which is that the implication of what you're saying is that the batteries are very often complements for fossil fuel generation, not substitutes.
So much so, Ed, that now people who have natural gas peaking plants are talking about associating batteries with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for instance, the classic argument is often made, well, look, we've had this extreme weather for 2 weeks. That's something beyond the capability of any battery system to handle. If you've got a typical stationary storage installation, you might have 2 hours of just discharge capacity, or 4 hours, or 6. 2 weeks is something else entirely. From what you're saying, Julian, that's sort of missing the point. You're not really trying to say to people, shut down every natural gas plant, shut down every coal plant, batteries can do it all. You're talking about complementing that thermal generation for rapid response, filling in gaps, maintaining grid stability at points of extreme stress. And you would accept that you are going to need the thermal generation as well for those periods when those extreme conditions go on for a long time.
Or some kind of generation, Ed, because it could be a different kind of generation depending on your location.
Very true. Could be nuclear for one. Could be geothermal,
could be nuclear,
I guess.
Geothermal if you're Scandinavia. Yeah. Could be hydro if you're, in the southern hemisphere, or even here in the United States and China. In some places it can be solar or wind.
True.
I will say the following. Battery storage is not a fuel tank, or does not serve the same function of a fuel tank. You have a fuel tank, one of those huge tanks where you keep gas or oil or coal, whatever you put in there. That primary energy, that serves a purpose, no? You give significant, huge amounts of energy in a place that is, you're ready to convert into electrons, quickly. Battery storage is not that. That need is a need that we do not serve, no? We do serve other needs that a fuel tank cannot serve. We can provide capacity, or, we very, very quickly at a very, very low cost. And what is capacity? Essentially, the ability to be dispatched during the peak hours of the day, when there's more need than actual production. So that's something that battery storage can do today at a much lower price point and a much faster than any other technology. So Amy, I think you were mentioning energy gas peaking plants. There's no need for gas peaking plants today. You should have gas plants to serve base load. Peaking should be provided by battery storage. Because you should have enough energy, enough electrons being produced to serve either by whatever source of generation. Let's not make a point, but let's use the gas plant as an example, but it doesn't necessarily apply only to it. A system should have enough electrons to cover all the needs of the system. But they all don't need to be produced following the demand, they can be produced in the most efficient manner. So a gas plant is most efficient if it serves at 80% of its, nameplate capacity without moving it all day. It reduces maintenance costs, it improves the heat rating. You should do that. And then it should be batteries the one when there's no need for those electrons that saves them. And when there's a need when those electrons are needed, can deliver them. That work is what we do. The fuel tank does something very different. Ensure that plant that needs to be working very stable and have enough primary energy to it. That's the way you should think about what the role of batteries. But what the role of battery storage can play as you define design a system. So battery storage does not presupposes a specific source of generation. That's where I guess that's where you were going at. It could be renewables. What do we do when we have renewables? Because they cannot be dispatched. You firm them up. When they're not producing, you store the energy when they're producing, and when they're not producing, you store. But for a gas plant, we do the opposite. You have your plant running stable. When the energy is not needed, you are storing it. When the energy is needed, you release it, ensuring that the plants are much more efficient and they are a more economic use of that asset. So we are in a way a driver that would change, the way that electricity systems are designed. Electricity systems were designed with a view that you'd always needed to match electricity demand, generation and demand, both in terms of generation, but also in terms of transforming the energy and delivering the energy. With battery storage, that assumption, you could question it. I don't really need that plant because what I need is the electrons, not the capacity need. I don't really need that substation because I can resolve that with energy storage. It completely changes the way we can think about the electricity, about how we design electricity sectors.
And do you think part of the reason why in different parts of the country, I won't mention PJM, in different parts of the country, people are having trouble with the concept because they can't think about it in a systems way? They're just, generation heavy in their thinking?
Yeah, they're clearly, there are needs for generation, so let's think about it. There are needs for generation. Just that the generation is not needed to meet peak demand. You need the electrons. You don't need the peak capacity. That you need to be able to separate it. It's difficult changes always makes people, takes a while for everybody to feel comfortable with change. So probably a little bit of that, not necessarily PGM specifically. But some people think, it's the old way. We should not change it the way we've been doing it for 100 years. We should do it, I'm afraid that it won't. But
there's this whole, it won't be reliable. It won't be reliable. Yeah. But the truth is, from your experience, it sounds like what you're saying, and I have to tell you the statistics bear it out, that places that have a high deployment of batteries have less outages.
Clearly. No, but think about it. Our systems have 99% availability. No gas plants gets anywhere near. I'm sorry I'm talking about gas plants, but any gas plant, coal plant, solar plant, or wind farm, any sort of generation, no matter what you can never get anywhere near it. Because these are electronic systems using chemistry, and they work, they don't have that many moving parts, so they're very reliable. So that they provide a reliability influx into the system that makes the systems a lot safer and a lot more reliable. So
I think that's really useful, actually. I think that's fantastic to have that as a kind of a mental model of what storage is for and how it works. I think I'd never really thought about it in quite that way, and I think that's very valuable to put it like that. I suppose, just obviously in defense of everyone who is working in the power industry today, and something that's been said often about the inherent conservatism of that industry, that's something I have an enormous amount of sympathy for, because the costs of failure are enormous and measured in human lives, and risk-taking is not really something you want to encourage. People are conservative for good reason, I always think. But as you say, it's clear there are opportunities here. There is change that is possible, that more that can be done. And actually, in the case of storage, people are embracing it. Actually, which brings me on to what I wanted to talk about, which was the general position of the US market. I was looking at our numbers. So we follow the North American storage market at Wood Mackenzie. Our number is that installations of grid scale battery storage in the US rose by 50% last year to about 16 gigawatts. It's a very, very fast growing market. As you say, it's clear in terms of the order intake and the way things are going that there's been a slowdown. Probably we may see fewer installations this year than last year. But what you think it's now, that market is stabilizing? Julian, how do you see it?
Yeah, I think there will be a cost for the uncertainty we had last year, like it always has. The regulatory uncertainty and the trade issues that we had that, lasted a quarter, 4 months. So that will, but if you, I don't think it will not be a reset of the base. What do I mean by that? That it will, once we get out of the little bit of a dip, we will probably see for a period of time, we'll go back to the same old, growth. I mean, there's a tremendous elasticity of demand on this product, tremendous elasticity of demand. So the more that the technology is proven from a technological point of view, that the more that is proven from a factual point of view, and as prices come down, this thing multiplies year by year. So we are very, very confident that this year is going to be, you might see some dips because of when you go back a year back when these things were contracted, you see a little bit of it, but it's not a reset of the market in any shape or form. No.
So let me ask you about that, because, one of the arguments that people made when you could see the big, beautiful bill coming was that people beefed up their stockpiles of batteries ahead of the bill. Have we worked off that backlog, or we still have enough supply, waiting to be deployed?
In our case, different than for solar and other technologies, there wasn't a big change in the way the law works, not significant. That it meant that people stockpile on actual batteries, no, because the conditions are very, very much the law with respect to electricity, to power, to storage. It did not change significantly. It did happen in some other technologies, no, and that drove some of it. But for our technology, wasn't a big driver because you'll get essentially the same treatment before or after the law. So that's the way you should think about it.
Although, what about the FEOC rules, foreign entities of concern, governing eligibility for tax credits? Those have clearly been designed to try and squeeze Chinese components, equipment, materials out of the supply chain. Chinese companies absolutely dominate the battery supply chain at the moment. So is that a problem for you?
No, I mean, let me start. We have a domestic supply chain in the U.S. that we started working years ago. I was of the view when I took on this role, there's no way the U.S. is going to have a power system dominated by Chinese equipment. It's just not going to happen. People thought I was crazy. I remember going to investor conference and people asked me, well, I said, which world were you? I mean, you got it from my accent, I'm from Latin America. Where I come from, these things don't happen. In the U.S., they happen less. So the U.S. is going to figure, I don't know how, I wasn't clear how it was going to be, but it was clearly going to be restrictions on integrating Chinese equipment into the grid, playing this important role. So we as a company were ready for it, or working on it from days ago and ready for the change. The law came up in a way that I think it is very well organized, if you ask me my opinion, in terms of allowing the industry to adapt to the needs, to the restrictions over time. So that's what I was saying, that there's not like an abrupt thing that, hey, this day you have to buy all these batteries. It's organized in a way that everybody can change their supply chain and change, look for the investments that they need to do and adapt to it. I think this is fundamental for our industry. If our industry wants to play a role in the power sectors in the U.S., a significant role, we need to bring the supply chain here. We're working on many areas, cybersecurity, in terms of the software, ensuring there's no software from any that we control it all, from firmware to ensure it's all also things that we control. We know where it comes from if it is in the signbows. But we beyond that, we need to go now to the supply chain, to the minerals, the battery production, all those parts. It's fundamental for. It's a security element. This technology is going to play such a pivotal role in the way the power systems are going to work. Maybe 10 years from now, it will take time. Changing technology takes 20, 30 years, so it will take time. But in order to be able to do it, to be there and to deliver that value to the U.S. consumers, we need to bring the supply chains to the U.S. And that's what we're working on. This is our top priority as a company.
In the last couple of years, some of the Americas has kind of like come up to that challenge, like Argentina and Chile. Are you seeing it be no, it's going to be U.S. domestic, or you think this trade between the United States, Canada, and Latin America is going to sort of pick up over time?
I am a believer that we will need. I'm a believer in free trade. You sound, you're a little incongruent. You were saying that needs to be made in the U.S. I think it needs to be. So out of all that supply chains, there are many roles to play. So lithium, probably you should mine it in the places where there are good mines for lithium. Chile is probably a good source, or Bolivia. But processing, you need to have the capacity to process lithium locally. But it is important not to close the market in a way that you do not compete, because then, if not, you become sloppy. You know what I mean? You do not become efficient. So you need to figure out a way of competing with international players, especially players that you trust, that, play with by your rules. And that's the world I hope that we can build. I'm not proposing here that we stop buying from China. That's not, I'm proposing that we develop a local supply chain that competes with China. I mean, we can have Chinese stuff here in the U.S. competing with what we do here locally, and hopefully will make us both better, the Chinese suppliers and the American suppliers.
Is that really possible, though, to build that competitive US-based supply chain, given how much cheaper Chinese materials and components have typically been? They've generally been the low-cost competitor, partly obviously because they get a lot of support from the government, partly probably just because they're better at it, that the Chinese companies are very efficient and very good at what they do.
They're clearly, the Chinese, it's very difficult to see a real frontier between government support and private sector when you go and work with some of these companies, where they get grants to do a lot of their basic research. They get some of their production that's, support by the local government. So, I go and visit some of these places, and hey, who finances? Hey, the local government. Who finances? The local university. They intertwine between government, the public sector, and the private sector in China. It is, it's not as clear as in the U.S., where you see the lines more clear. But, I'm a capitalist by belief, they say. So I believe that if you're a capitalist, like, I am, that the best way of investing is for the market to guide it, because you'll make less mistakes and you make business more resilient. So I do agree that when you looked at China, to say, how are we going to go there? How can we do it that quickly? Well, I believe that we can do it. When I look at the education in the U.S., cost of electricity in the U.S., there are a few things that we need to adapt, no doubt, but there's no reason, there's no impediment to get there. And I think that the capitalist rules, the way of ensuring that decisions are made on thinking about the market, but the market as a guide of what you do are going to make sure that we will make much better and efficient decisions and we should, but the other point, we should do the same thing that Chinese did to us. Didn't you know?
Well, I think the really interesting opportunity here is that it was hard to do because our electricity system we were like, oh, we're going to replace what we already have with this other thing, which we say is more desirable. Now you have a growing market. There's a lot of incentive to have better systems, more optimized systems, to have more efficiency, lower cost. And so the capitalist stimulus, I think, is there just naturally by the fact that we're having not enough capacity and there are bottlenecks. So the interesting, kind of opportunity in that is not only, hey, we have a growing market, and so therefore, China has overcapacity, but, we have a growing market. So that's an opportunity for U.S. companies. But I think the second question really is, is there some technology leapfrog? Because, one of the great things about the capitalist system is that, we need these batteries to do A, B, and C. And what's the next generation of batteries? Could it be better? Could we beat the Chinese lithium batteries because we're going to have, say, solid state batteries or
That's right.
Sodium whatever batteries? Where do you think it's going?
Well, lithium was invented, or in the Western world, in the U.S., and Japan. So hey, it's not like they invented it. They realized how to do it at scale at a much better price, and clearly perfected the technology to do what it does today. That when it was originally. So I do believe that once we have, you made a good point, Amy. We in the power sector sometimes are thinking with the paradigm or the view of when we were replacing technology. When, the reality, if you were closing a plant and putting a new one, you're no more employment in the, it's not like it was a change in employment and a change in taxes or a change in the well-being of people. It was the same. So no one was in a hurry. No one was in a hurry. Today we're in a different world. We're all in a hurry. If we don't deliver some of our products on time, the school districts do not get the taxes they need to build the new gymnasium or stadium or classes or the hospital. You start looking at it, and the speed is going to change the way the U.S. behave. And if the U.S. is something, not having been born here, I see it. How the U.S. creates its industries so quickly that, the oil, all these industries were created here. And, I don't think the U.S. has lost that capability of creating an industry. Not at all.
And hey, listen, Texas is like a supercharged capitalist state. And with all the dialogue and all the rhetoric from politicians and so forth, the bottom line is they have deployed a giant amount of batteries in the last 2 years.
So, hey, the U.S., I think, is going to do great. We are from the power sector because we were used to, 10 years of no demand increases. We all feel, a little bit afraid, like this emergency decree that was recently issued. Oh, people, I said, that's going to be the norm from now. Get ready. Because we're all in a hurry. And, we need as an industry, take that cassette out and put the, faster cassette in that's going to drive at a much higher speed, because that's the way we need to work. And many, many industries in the U.S. that work that way, space today, with all the work we've seen in space, not only SpaceX, but all the other companies that are changing the way, no other countries going with that, number of companies, number of people, number of, in an industry that, so hey, I think that we need to copy those models and bring it into our, we will do it. It will happen. And change the way things work.
And those same companies that are going to space,
so far,
they need electricity and they need it now.
That's right.
Right? And so if the utility sector doesn't provide it, they'll figure out a way to provide it for themselves.
And there is something that, I clearly, our technology, but I still believe the grid is the best way of providing electricity. It's the best way. And my technology, when we think about it, we're not thinking about, hey, we want to eliminate the grid with battery storage. This is not the way we think of it. We think, how are we going to make the grid so much efficient that nobody will think, I better disconnect because I can do it by myself? Because the grid is the best way of providing electricity efficiently, economically, and reliably.
Do you not agree with that, Amy? I feel like I strongly agree with that point. The power grid, apart from, as we sometimes say on the show, with being this organizational, technological marvel that it is also a fantastic solution for supplying electric power to the customers who need it.
Well, so here's the interesting question about that. It's not that I disagree per se, but as you know, Ed, I've been working on virtual power plant, like, where are they going in? What kind of business model is there? Do they make any money? How do they work? Not one for one, but if you look at the places that have deployed the most virtual power plant technology, it's actually places like Florida, where in the end, you had no choice, right? The system was not providing you what you needed. And so a lot of VPP went into Florida. Big now, I think you're going to see it building out in Texas. NRG has announced a program. And everybody's still grappling with, how do we make money behind the meter if we're trying to do it behind the meter? Or how do we make money coordinating with the utility? The utilities themselves, some of them have had VPP programs that weren't successful. Vermont, little grid, but, I've talked to people up there. I mean, they eliminated the duck curve in a place where you don't even think there's enough solar radiation for that to even be possible, right? So I do think that if the grid doesn't organize, like if we can't get the grid to really solve what we need, I think you're going to see more and more and more people like literally take matters into their own hand. And then the question is, how do the ISOs, how do the utilities integrate all of that, into their business?
Yeah. No, and I'm not proposing that the grid, became you are required to be connected to the grid. See, the grid is the most efficient way to do it. And maybe a way to ensure that the grid is efficient is allowing people, hey, you can put your own BPP, and if you can do it better, it puts up an incentive for the grid to be better. But I think the grid, like there are clearly exceptions, but I say that from 95% of the cases, a well-designed grid and a well-designed regulatory system will provide a much better, reliability, cost, quality of power, than any sort of your own solution type of. But the grid needs to be, we need, as an industry, we need to be faster. Why are the AI, some of the data centers, why are they bring your own generation? Not because they think it's a good idea, it's because they have no other option.
Yeah, no other. I mean, that is exactly my point.
I don't know how to run a grid, but if I were running a grid today, I'll be saying, hey, I'm losing a customer. Why? I need to be able to do this better than somebody else by itself. So.
Hey, I saw that firsthand when I was living in California, which was not too long ago. And we had, it was sort of the backdrop of the post-Enron electricity crisis mindset. There was this accident at a place called Aliso Canyon, which was the big natural gas storage hub for the state. And there was all, crying people on TV. There were regulators saying, no, we're not letting you bring it back on until you could ensure the health and safety of everybody near this facility. And Tesla and some of the Sunrun and some of the big aggregators that we still see around today went running to the legislature in Sacramento and said, we can do this with solar and batteries. And they got a nod from the governor and from the legislature. And in the course of I think it was 4 weeks, 6 weeks, they put in 104 megawatts of solar and battery storage down around LA. And then Aliso Canyon stayed closed because you could do it with batteries, and it kind of proved it out. And then once it proved it out, there were a lot of players who were like, hey, this worked over here, let's do it over here. And then it really sort of took off in California. And it's now something like 6 or 10% of capacity.
Yeah. No, clearly there are, they're like any market, the grid is a market with imperfections, no? So, you're right. I'm not, and I think it's very, very important that we allow for solutions like that, because that keeps the grid and the grid operators and the grid regulators and our industry, behaving well, because you know that if you don't do your work well, somebody else can resolve their own problem at a, faster or cheaper or more environmentally friendly or more efficiently,
So, Julian, I wonder then how this is affecting your business at Fluence in terms of the customer base or the use cases that people are finding when they buy your products. Is that changing? I mean, you mentioned behind the meter power. Are you starting to get data center operators coming to you and saying, can you provide us a system to provide behind the meter power, behind the meter energy storage, because that's got to be an essential part of our package for keeping this facility online?
So tell you about data center, which is an interesting microcosm of grid, quote unquote, imperfections, if you want to call it that word. So we have essentially four needs when you looked at it, that we see from data centers, and they're overlap. So don't think they're not like defined that way. There's some overlap, but the first one, and the one that has if I looked at my pipeline that has the biggest demand, is what we call speed to power. So what is it? It's a data center that wants to connect to a grid, but the grid is telling them, hey, I need to have the ability to interrupt you any times a year or any times a day, or I'm not going to give you firm power. I'm only going to give you firm power for 8 hours a day. Whatever. Each grid has its own limitations, and they're bringing battery storage to be able to meet the grid conditions. So the grid tells them, I'm going to interrupt you this amount of hours a year, so you need batteries for that, or no firm power. You cannot take any power from the grid during peak hours. And that's today the big driver. Even though you read a lot about bring your own generation solution, when you talk to the market, they all want to connect to the grid. And they're trying to figure out a way of connecting to the grid, more quickly. As quickly
Well,
as
yeah, no, listen. The voluntary system in Texas was put in parallel with the curtailment law.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's a curtailment law, but if you want to connect, you can have this voluntary program where, like you say, you bring your own resource that's probably going to be battery storage, and it sits there, and then they give you 24-hour notice and you use it.
That's right. So that's today. Then we have the bring your own generation solutions. Some of them are renewable, some of them are thermal. Generally, what we do, our technology either, firms up renewable generation, we provide, or we help flexibilize what we call dispatchable energy. So ensure that if you have a gas plant that is going to have outages and you want it to run as stable as you can, battery storage can help you ensure that, you can adapt that dispatchable energy to the actual demand. So those are I will say, if you ask me, the two main. Bring your, speed to power is by far the biggest demand. Then this one is the second. And then we have, more ancillary supports. One is clearly backup power. Now that you're already connected to the data center, you can resync the number of gensets diesel gensets you need, because, hey, you already have that capacity. So we can also deliver backup power. So that's very helpful. And the second one is quality of power. Data centers have very volatile, they move, especially AI data centers that are learning, the ones that are running algorithms to learn. They move up and down very, very, and we can help dampen that, to connect.
So that's interesting. So the batteries have a real utility for training and for those companies that are trying to get to AGI, because they can help adjust the stability of the electricity as it goes up, load goes up and down.
But it's very quick. You need response times in less than 10 milliseconds. So that's less than 0.01 of a second. It's extremely quick. So you need high speed. We are not the only solution, as you know. They have all the solutions to address this. They run what they call phantom calculations. So they actually consume energy if they were training to ensure that to reduce a little bit the profiles of both. We are trying to help that, and they're clearly chips are getting more and more efficient. So we should see over time that will get better. But we help them on that solution. But if you ask me today, where we have, the great majority of the demand we have from data centers is speed to power. I have a condition from the grid, I'm going to meet it. So there's a huge demand for this. And this is what drives is people. Most of the data centers need to connect to the grid very, very quickly, and they know that the best way and the fastest way to meet the grid conditions is connecting to. And we've been working with them, and we're very happy. We're excited about this change.
And so, what would a typical contract there look like then? So, would a data center, as you say, that's looking for speed to power to get connected to the grid quickly, would they aim to have all of their power demand covered potentially by batteries? So they'd have, if it's a 1 gigawatt data center, you'd have a gigawatt of battery supply, which could cover it for 2 hours or 4 hours or something. And then they would then offer that to the grid and say, we will be interruptible. You can cut us off the grid for 2 hours or 4 hours a day, whatever it is.
If you were fully interrupted, if you can interrupt you fully, you probably need, 100%. But I will say that the fully interrupted are not that many, or fully interrupted, every day, So I think they do, probabilistic analysis and then decide, and with the cost of availability, they decide how much you want to put. So today we don't have. This is a new market segment, as you know. I cannot give you like a rule of thumb of how to think. If you see, 100 megawatt data center, it should have 100 megawatt batteries. That we're not there yet in terms of where the market will sell.
Right, as we often say, it's a very fast-moving industry. It's evolving rapidly.
Yeah, right.
We're all of us still finding out exactly how these business models are going to work, where the most effective solutions are going to be, and it's a changing picture all the time.
It's exciting to see. For me, what makes it the most exciting, if I can maybe give you, is that it proves a point that we will put the battery storage, and we at Fluence is what we think about this. We'll play a role all around the value chain, of a battery storage of power, from generation to use. And we will play a role. The roles change. Clearly, it's our ability, the versatility of our technologies, that we can play the role of demand, the role of generation, the role of a transmission line, the role of a transformer. We can play many, many roles just by ability to charge and discharge very quickly.
Julian is really opened my eyes to how broad the role can be for this technology. I mean, we've seen it kind of morph out, right? Before it was just a backup system, right? And then it was virtual power plant. We could make it be actual function the same way as generation in terms of supplying the grid at different times of, different time of use, time of day use. And I do think, the sort of regulator community and even the utility community, hasn't quite caught up to the potential of the technology. I mean, I guess that's what I see when I talk to people and, work with the statistics for outages and things like that. We haven't really caught up to understanding just how powerful technology it could be.
Yeah, I think this, not that we want to play a tragedy, but this Fern, the recent storm, I think is bringing people attention. Look how the system behaved much, much better. There were a lot of investments made into it, but you can actually calculate, and we're in that process ourselves. Hey, what role did we play? What did we avoid? Why did we have not been there? What would have happened? And that to bring that up to people's attention.
Okay, so I have to mention Puerto Rico because we just finished the Super Bowl, right? And we had an incredible halftime performance by Bad Bunny and other celebrity singers. And of course, now it's trending on the internet that when you saw those sort of fireworks in the background, it was symbolic to the blackouts and explosions that happened in the grid in Puerto Rico. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How should we be seeing his music and how it fits in with, battery versus grid solutions in Puerto Rico?
I'm a fan, but I could understand that the Bad Bunny could be an acquired taste and not everybody likes it. But I'm a fan. But I was surprised also. I watched the halftime show. And as he had like 4 or 5 poles, and he went up in one, and the poles had kind of caught fire, or like they were showering. And he's it tells you one of the most important, star from Puerto Rico, dedicating probably his biggest opportunity to present himself to the U.S. market, talking about the unreliability of the distribution network or the power systems in Puerto Rico. No, I mean, I was, but it tells you when I have friends from Puerto Rico, how disruptive to people's life and to people's capacity to meet their basic needs is having an unreliable power sector. And the song is called Apagón, which is called, it means in our word, in Spanish, it means blackout. It's a song about that, from the biggest stars. So it was, in a way, it's sad that Puerto Rico is going through that, please, clearly. But it is good that he brought it to everybody's attention. And then now, at least here, we are talking about it. And hopefully this will provide a more pressure to the people and the powers that can address this to address it quickly.
Yeah, I have to say, I had never knowingly heard a single note of any of Bad Bunny's music before the Super Bowl halftime show. But I've become a bit of a fan. I very much enjoyed the performance. And as you say, in particular, because of this very interesting contribution to the debate over Puerto Rico's grid. The as you say, in that song, El Apagón, which I actually had looked up before this recording, I think, from which is it's his last album, is it, or the previous one from 2022?
Yeah, so I think it's the previous one.
I have to admit, I don't speak any Spanish, so that was educational to me to learn the Spanish word for blackout. But I thought it was interesting, and I see there's been a little bit of discussion in the wake of this about what is actually the right solution for Puerto Rico, and it's clear that the problems are obvious to everybody. There has actually been some disagreement, and I think the current administration has disagreed with some of the things that the previous administration was trying to do in terms of, is it better to invest in distributed resources, solar and storage, or is it better actually to invest in the grid and more centralized generation? Yeah. And so it's a debate.
That gets into the hurricane debate. So
right.
Julian and I may not 100% agree. I mean, I remember during Hurricane Ian, one of the big takeaways at Babcock Ranch, which was a 100% solar community, is that 3 million Floridians were in the dark, but Babcock Ranch had electricity. And so, you do wonder about this question in a place that has a lot of storm history. Is it better to go distributed?
My own view on it, as you said, Amy, will probably not necessarily disagree. I do think that this, distributed generation, we should think about a mixed system. And what do I mean by it? Communities having the ability to sustain themselves, not connected to, or essentially sustain themselves, not connected to a national grid, but having a national grid that will make it more, and that combination is the right approach. So you think about smaller communities that, we have the ability with our own resources to sustain ourselves, and we can either, depending on how you want to be on a daily life, we can export or import electricity for that community use. But when there's a crisis, when there is a storm of any sort, we'll have the ability, and if the national grid gets, in the case of Puerto Rico, gets unreliable, you can, disconnect yourself and ensure that you can keep. I think a combination like that is a way to work on this. You need to be using, I think it's a false dichotomy, in my opinion, to think it's one against the other. It should be both. You clearly need, in a system like Puerto Rico, where we will see more hurricanes, every 3 or 4 years, one passes by. In order for a national grid to be resilient, it needs to be based on this, on distributed systems. That is it. You have your resiliency of the national grid depends on your ability to connect distributed system. I think that will be for Puerto Rico will be probably the most efficient way to deliver that. There's sometimes, unfortunately, politicians get involved in discussions that are more ideological, trying to win political points, and actually, resolving the short-term urgency. Hopefully, they were all watching yesterday, Bad Bunny. They all were working to the
and
resolve those issues. Yeah.
And hopefully, also they're listening to this podcast. I think that's fantastic that we can
have
this very
interesting
debate. Very interesting debate inspired by watching a Super Bowl halftime show. So, have to say, earns a lot of respect for that. Well, unfortunately, we do have to leave it there. But it's been fantastic talking to you. Many thanks, Julian.
It's great. I enjoyed it very, very much. I want to be part of this gang.
Well, definitely. We would love to have you back again. We will make sure that happens. Many thanks, Amy. I'm sure I'll be seeing you again very soon.
Yeah, I'm sure, Ed. Thanks so much. It's really been a pleasure today.
Absolutely. Thanks to our producers, Stuart Duffy, Toby Biggins-Gilchrist, and Dan Cottrell. And above all, of course, many thanks to all of you for listening. We really do value your feedback. Please do keep that coming. And we'll be back soon with all the latest news and views on the future of energy. Until then, goodbye.